Hi, I'm sat here today with Dr. Hilary Weeks, who's course leader for English Literature here at the University of Gloucester. Hi Hilary.
Hello Dave.
We're going to talk today about the study of English Lit at A-level to an extent, because there seems to have been a bit of a media spotlight shone recently on the English Literature A-level. What kind of issues has that brought out?
It's very interesting to go online, as you can do, and try to see what the A-level texts are. Not just what the texts are, but how they're being taught. For example, if you go onto the website of one of the boards, you will see that Shakespeare is studied in the context of English literary heritage. Now that's a very particular way of presenting a series of texts to students and asking them to think about it in a certain way. It goes beyond a simple questions of genre and even simple questions of context, really.
So it makes a presumption about the context in which it needs to be presented, presumably.
In that sense, yes, and it's curious that it's happening at a time when, in fact, you could certainly say that the nation is an exhausted form. Gordon Brown, in his recent book, talks about how nationalism is, in fact, a spent force, and he talks about that in the context of the Scottish bid for independence, very controversial. But he certainly has a point that the nation state, as if you like, a way of thinking about things, a way of doing business, would seem to be on its way out, and yet we're still asking students to think in this very stratified sort of way.
Well, there seems to be quite a contrast between that kind of globalised viewpoint of the nation states declining in geopolitical significance, however you want to put it, allied with the rise of nationalism in more nationalistic political movements, both in this country and across Europe.
And indeed across the world as well.
And certainly you see it in Southeast Asia and the kind of the Buddhist fundamentalist movements that are nationalistic.
Yes.
So you see kind of, on one hand, a tendency away from nationalism, on the other kind of side, a movement really kind of, it'd be perhaps rather judgmental to call it a retreat into nationalism, a movement towards it. And that being kind of played out in classrooms.
Yes. Perhaps one answer is to ask ourselves what heritage is. What is heritage? Is it tins of shortbread? Is it a map? Is it a place where you can go? And you remember recently at the university, Professor Roy Jones gave a fascinating research seminar today on hardy country and what that means to tourists. For those of you who weren't here, you missed a great talk. Is there a video?
There probably is somewhere.
Oh, okay, because I would recommend it if it were on. Professor Jones asked people living in Dorset whether they perceived themselves as part of hardy country, whether that mattered to tourists coming to Hardy, what they were looking for. Were they looking for a literary figure? Were they looking for a cultural figure? Did Hardy belong to the people who were looking for him? It sounds a rather mad thing to say, but that's kind of the way it works, isn't it?
So this idea of literary heritage, so heritage in general terms is no doubt a kind of rather contested and problematic term, but literary heritage implies some kind of unbroken chain of national outpouring which has some sense of kind of constructor identity.
It can do. And again, whose literature? Whose literature, and in which way do we own Shakespeare, if we own that at all? You might say that there are multiple heritages, if you want to use the word, in British literature. There's Afro-Caribbean, British Caribbean heritage, there's Gaelic speaking, there's Welsh writing in English, so many heritages. Even women's writing can perhaps be considered a type of heritage. Interesting, it's 40 years this week, I believe, since colleges in Oxford went co-ed.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's
unbelievably recent.
Our lifetime, as Evan Davis said on Radio 4, our lifetime, really? Goodness me. Well, the answer to that is, of course, well, most women still don't become Prime Minister or very few women in the Cabinet, so what's new? But that's a kind of heritage, isn't it? Kind of
absolutely. Belonging. But that kind of heritage, talking about sort of subgenres or different kind of identities and their connection to Englishness and literature, is interesting to do when we're only an hour's drive from Stratford.
Indeed, as we are.
You go into Stratford, you find it feels a bit like, at least in some parts of the centre, like you're in a theme park.
Sure.
You know, you go in there for the Shakespeare experience.
Yes.
I think even one of the museums is called that.
Oh, the experience. When did that word start to leach into everything we use? That it's not enough for people to learn something, it's not enough for people to have their own thoughts, but an experience, a pre-made experience, must be somehow, is there to achieve and must be achieved. It must be obtained. It's rather like saying, I achieved a purchase when you mean I bought something.
Absolutely. I think so. That certainly the idea.
Be in my bonnet here, excuse me.
Surely not. But when you kind of visit somewhere like Stratford, you get a version of heritage that's the heritage industry. It's a very specific idea.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that's what's meant in the curriculum when it talks about literary heritage. But perhaps it doesn't make clear what is meant.
Indeed. And again, another thing that's being contested, I think, is world literature. We can read much world literature in English translation. So the idea of English literature is being contested on another front. You might say it's the counterfront to the national, our literature.
We should only study British texts.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, what is the point of that when you can walk into Waterstones and the shelves are full of works in translation and people are reading Pamuk, for example, in translation. He doesn't write in English, and yet he's one of the world's great novelists.
And presumably much of the world's literature that is written in English isn't written in England or Britain.
Very much of it is. Some of it's written in America, believe it or not.
Another video. Language, in this series I was talking to Professor Wynne about Maya Angelou and her contribution, how much poorer he felt curricula would be without reading North American writers.
Yeah, that was a great interview, wasn't it? Yeah, it's very persuasive.
And he made a strong case for people just reading broadly, and he's almost for saying the breadth of the reading is an important aspect that needs to be kind of foregrounded in curriculum more, which it isn't. Rather than specifying text, specifying, you must read lots of different things.
Indeed, and the people who design A-level curricula have paid that some attention. I mean, I don't want to be too negative about that. They've thought about. They have units called texts and contexts, or what was made a couple of notes there, exploring modern texts and so on. So they are kind of encouraging that type of approach. Inevitably, given the demands of the exam, the year, the curriculum, things just get reduced. And one response, I suppose, is just to go with that. It certainly was the same when I did my A-levels, quite a long time ago now.
And there's been a lot of discussion amongst English lit teachers about do they want... I mean, one advantage of having given texts or text from a solution or an anthology is that teachers can share resources.
Indeed.
They can build up resources they know other colleagues can use, and there's an awful great culture of that, be it via social media or via various means of sharing resources. It allows over years people can, as people said about Of Mice and Men, people have developed amazing resources over the years for that and have shared them widely.
And that helps, doesn't it, where the teachers are under such pressure.
And have found ways to help students who are struggling or doing really well and different kinds of... And that's the alternative point of view that I've seen quite a bit is maybe we shouldn't have any set texts. And maybe we should just say the teachers can choose the books, and actually it's the skills that need examining, and the specifications that talk about what skills are being examined. Is the student demonstrating these skills? But which books is up to the teacher?
That would make perfect sense.
But again, so there are a lot of different pressures, different ways. So in a way, if you had a blank piece of paper and the power to rewrite the A-level specs, which would be great fun, I'm sure.
That would be great fun.
It wouldn't be, even if you had quite a strong view about what you thought should be in there, there are a lot of competing pressures about a lot of competing arguments for what would be good to do in terms of the structure of it, I think.
Indeed, and then you would inevitably run into quality problems, wouldn't you? If not from the school board and governors or so. There would be some probably spurious discussion of the parity of the texts, the levels of difficulty, the quality people who are looking at it perhaps from the outside and who have a role to play will be trying to look at synergies and levels of quality across texts. But it's important that we don't get into spurious arguments about which is more difficult, Northanger Abbey or Hullabaloo in the Guava Orchard.
And
the fact you can get different things from them and the same things as well.
Yeah, but I think what we, as a university with a humanities department, in your case English Lit, what we would be looking for in students coming in, I guess, one of the main aspects of A-level, it's meant to do many things. One thing it's meant to be is the gateway to higher education.
Indeed.
Take you from further ed into higher ed. So I guess my kind of final question to you, Hilary, would be, what would we want to be able to give people that we would value?
I would like them to be able to, the stock answer, which I shall begin by giving, would be a love of reading. But I strongly know that students have that anyway. They do English A-level because they love reading, because they're interested, they're passionate, they're committed. I would like to see a return to a focus on language over theme. Theme is very important, theme and context are important, but it's been slightly, I think, at the expense of close reading. Very close reading, down to the word, down to the sentence. What is this word? Well, think, what does the word green mean in English? It means a dozen things in English, and it's changed over the years. I would like a greater sense of how language works, perhaps.
So I think that's probably accurate in that students coming to university who've done A-levels, many things might surprise them, many things might not surprise them, might be exactly how they predicted they'd be. But one thing that they will find there's quite a lot of, be it English Lit, be it in studying philosophy, is there's quite a lot of close reading. You don't suddenly read lots more books, although you might end up reading most of your spare time, but you do quite a lot of reading things in more detail than you've ever thought was possible.
Absolutely. And the students do you teach on HM 4000? That's our first humanities level 4.
How did you forget my amazing lecture on that last year?
I just wondered if you did any seminars as well. But in the seminars we pay very, very close attention to the language of poetry. We have another module on the language of literature, which is also doing the same kind of thing. But I figure that you just can't do enough of this stuff. And it's occasionally frustrating for students who want to cut to the chase, who want to talk about some of the major themes, and we can do that too, but I always try to insist that's the second part of
So close reading has this real...
Reading, yes.
And actually I think if anything characterises the way we get students to work at Gloucester across the humanities, that close engagement with text is probably kind of foregrounded in so much of our work.
Absolutely. All of us, and certainly on my team, and I know on your team too, all of us put a very high priority on that, and it works. And it's sometimes a challenge to students to come and who are smart and who have read a lot, and they kind of expect to read a certain way, and they have to adjust, and they do. That's the fun.
Yeah. Well, fun seems like a good point to stop, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick.